15 gemstones humans mispriced for centuries. Some gemstones were valued wrong for centuries, not because they were common, but because their rarest qualities stayed hidden where no one thought to look. Among the 15 revealed here, one hides fire stronger than diamond, another formed under conditions the earth can't repeat, and one was misidentified long after it was already cut. So before the story begins, one question shapes everything. What if the world's most extraordinary gemstones were never rare, only unseen? Ranked 15th, Prehnite. Too common, yet one of a kind. In museum drawers across Europe, Prehnite once lay in quiet anonymity. Soft green nodules cataloged as curiosities, priced as if the earth had produced them without intention or artistry. Traders saw them as secondary minerals, geological footnotes formed in the cooling spaces of volcanic basalt. And for centuries, this assumption held: Prehnite was common, abundant, predictable. But the stone carried a truth hidden beneath its waxy surface, a truth that evaded apothecaries, mineral agents, and early natural philosophers alike. The revelation came not from a market surge, nor from a collector's obsession, but from the stone's internal architecture. Under magnification, its once dismissed translucence revealed an intricate, interlocking mesh of microcrystals, structures arranged as if nature had practiced a quiet precision unknown in minerals considered ordinary. What seemed muted from afar displayed, up close, a complexity closer to biological symmetry than crystalline monotony. The stone was never simple. The human understanding of it was. Early explorers, unaware of its subtleties, traded Prehnite by the basket. It was carried out of African quarries in sacks used for river stones, not valuables. Workers broke larger nodules without hesitation, believing finer minerals were concealed inside. Yet the crystals that spilled out were the treasure. They had always been. Only in modern gemology labs did the truth of their formation emerge, a rare sequence of cooling, hydration, and recrystallization that required conditions so narrow that only a fraction of the world's basaltic landscapes could produce prehnite of true clarity. The revelation deepened when ultraviolet imaging exposed the stone's inner luminosity. Soft, aqueous, almost vegetal. Chemical analysis revealed traces of iron and calcium arranged in near-perfect continuity, the result of millions of years of silent equilibrium. This was not common. This was geological discipline disguised as modesty. And then came the clarity specimens. Semi-transparent, pale green crystals shaped in fan-like aggregates. Each growth line recording the memory of water trapped and released during volcanic metamorphism. These pieces changed everything. Markets corrected, museums recategorized. What had once been priced as an incidental mineral shifted into the realm of collectible rarity. The stone had not changed, only human perception had. In regions of Mali and Australia, local miners began to recognize Prehnite's subtle cues. The faint cooling patterns on basalt walls, the chalky rind that hinted at unbroken structures within. Excavation shifted from casual extraction to deliberate recovery. The world had learned to pay attention. Prehnite remains a reminder that the Earth's most intricate architectures often appear in the gentlest forms, waiting for a moment when human attention finally learns to slow down enough to see their intention. And as Prehnite's quiet correction settled into the mineral world, another stone waited beneath centuries of misunderstanding, one whose brilliance was never hidden, yet rarely believed. If Prehnite revealed the cost of human inattention, the next gemstone exposes the consequences of human certainty. The assumption that true fire belongs only to the well-known. Here, a mineral once dismissed as industrial ore prepares to fracture that belief entirely. Ranked 14th, Sphalerite, the gem with fire hotter than diamond. Beneath the steel towns and smelter districts of the 19th century, Sphalerite lived a double life. To miners, it was zinc ore, indispensable, yes, but stripped of glamour, measured only in tonnage. Cart after cart rolled out of underground galleries, each one carrying crystals with a brilliance no one bothered to witness. The world demanded metal, not light, and so the stone remained trapped between industrial hunger and geological magnificence, its value suppressed by the very economies that depended on it. Within this tension lay a paradox. Sphalerite possessed one of the highest dispersions known to mineralogy, greater than diamond, greater than zircon. Yet it was condemned to furnaces, broken down for alloying, functioning as raw material rather than rarity. A stone capable of splitting light into spectral fire was being crushed by hammers designed for ore. Markets dictated its fate long before gemologists could intervene. When cutters first experimented with it, a second conflict emerged. The stone was soft, fragile, and prone to cleaving. One wrong angle, and a crystal collapsed into fragments. Precision was possible, but only through risk. Jewelers hesitated. Who would champion a gemstone that demanded sacrifice, yet offered no established value? Sphalerite seemed to challenge the very institutions that could elevate it. Too delicate for mainstream jewelry, too radiant to ignore, it lived in an economic purgatory. Collectors of the early 20th century dismissed the gem as unstable. Merchants, wary of returns and complaints, priced it for hobbyists, not for connoisseurs. Even museums stored sphalerite in mineral halls instead of gem galleries. Its identity remained fractured between two worlds, the world of ore and the world of brilliance. And the longer that friction persisted, the more its true worth slipped from human attention. Then came the turning point. Under calibrated lighting, expertly cut orange and honey-colored crystals erupted with internal fire, spectral ribbons flickering with an intensity diamonds could not replicate. Spectrometers confirmed what the eye already suspected. Sphalerite was not simply bright, it was volatile with color, dispersing wavelengths at nearly triple the rate of traditional gemstones. A mineral long treated as a commodity revealed a secret it had carried since the dawn of its formation. As gem photography improved, the stone's dual nature, its beauty and its fragility, became part of its identity rather than a flaw. Markets recalibrated. Collectors sought dark, iron-rich crystals from Spain's Oliva mine and golden, honey-toned specimens from Mexico. Demand surged not because sphalerite became easier, but because difficulty itself became a mark of distinction. A gemstone that once served industry now commanded a place in private vaults. Sphalerite endures as a gemstone shaped by conflict. Between light and structure, fragility and fire, its identity forged not in abundance, but in the narrow space where beauty must fight to be seen. As the fire of sphalerite challenged the boundaries of what a gemstone could be, another mineral waited on the opposite end of the spectrum, quiet, elusive, and far easier to overlook. Where sphalerite overwhelmed the senses, this next stone defied them, slipping through centuries of human study disguised as something ordinary. Its mispricing did not arise from conflict, but from confusion. A jewel whose true identity vanished beneath a color so vivid that many believed it could not possibly be real. Ranked 13th. Hauyne, mistaken for cheap blue glass. Hauyne entered human history as a contradiction, its color too intense for the humble host rocks that held it. Early mineralogists found the stone perplexing. The samples dissolved partially in water, resisted predictable classification, and behaved more like a chemical experiment than a crystalline species. When heated, they shifted tone. When cut, their transparency fluctuated. The stone seemed to disobey the rules that governed its neighbors. What manner of mineral produced a blue this unnatural? This anomaly kept Hauyne trapped in misidentification. Traders bundled it with cheap glass beads. Collectors labeled it as dyed feldspar or contaminated quartz. Some museums displayed it without formal documentation, assuming the pieces were modern fabrications slipped into collections by mistake. A gemstone that held one of the rarest hues found in nature was treated as an imitation of itself. Yet the earth had forged its color through a process both violent and exact. Deep within volcanic chambers, pockets of gas-rich magma cooled at erratic rates, capturing sulfur-bearing molecules and locking them into a cubic lattice. This delicate choreography, rapid quenching, trapped volatiles, unusual chemical substitution, created a blue impossible to replicate in any other mineral. Hauyne was not merely colorful, it was geologically improbable. Every crystal that survived to the surface was a geological accident made permanent. Further anomalies emerged under analysis. Under ultraviolet light, Hauyne displayed spectral behaviors inconsistent with its composition. Inclusions formed geometric puzzles, triangles nested within hexagons, threads of lazur blue weaving between transparent windows. Its refractive patterns shifted subtly depending on direction, as though the stone carried multiple mineral identities at once. Even its hardness refused to align neatly with its visual delicacy. Nothing about Hauyne resolved cleanly. These peculiarities, once sources of doubt, became evidence of authenticity. As spectrometers advanced, the stone's complex chemistry finally revealed itself. Its volatility was not a flaw. It was the signature of volcanic forces operating under unique constraints. Mines that produced fine specimens, particularly the famed Italian quarries, yielded crystals so scarce that entire pockets could be exhausted in a single season. What had been mistaken for common artificial debris emerged as a mineral of remarkable rarity. Hauyne's improbable blue endures as a quiet defiance of geological expectation, a fragment of volcanic chance reminding us that nature's rarest hues are often born from conditions that should never have aligned. If Hauyne challenged belief through its improbability, the next gemstone unsettled understanding in a different way, by concealing entire landscapes of color within a single crystal. Where Hauyne defied expectation through anomaly, this stone hides its truth behind shifting planes, revealing one face only to withdraw it the moment the light changes. Its mispricing did not stem from rarity or confusion, but from a deeper misconception, the belief that a mineral showing many identities must somehow possess none. Ranked 12th, Andalusite, the stone with a hidden color code. Andalusite does neither. Its beauty is not given freely. It is engineered by the earth with a precision so deliberate that every crystal seems to carry its own set of instructions. The mispricing that surrounded it for centuries came from a simple mistake: the assumption that its muted first impression reflected a lack of complexity. Yet within its lattice lies one of nature's most meticulous calibrations. This stone operates like a prism assembled with intention. Light enters as a single beam, but exits divided into multiple truths: green, amber, rose, and umber, not blended but organized into separate axes. This is pleochroism, but not the soft shifting seen in other gems. Andalusite arranges its colors with almost architectural discipline. Each hue aligns to a structural direction, creating a crystalline blueprint where every angle corresponds to a distinct chromatic identity. When early gem cutters handled it, the stone seemed uncooperative, refusing to settle on a single personality. Only later did they understand that the mineral was not inconsistent. It was obedient to a system more precise than any human expectation. The earth forged this precision under conditions that allowed no margin for error, pressures that transformed sediment into metamorphic mosaics, temperatures that locked aluminum, silicon, and oxygen into a lattice capable of splitting photons with accuracy. Slight variations in trace elements acted like tuning forks, shifting the colors by degrees that microscopes later measured with admiration. These internal arrangements were not chaotic. They were calibrated to a rhythm as strict as that of engineered alloys. Because of this discipline, Andalusite remained misunderstood. Traders saw browns where there were hidden greens. Merchants saw neutrals where there were dormant reds. Most cut the stone without understanding its axes, and the result was muted color, proof, they believed, of mediocrity. Prices remained modest, and the mineral languished in drawers marked miscellaneous silicates. Andalusite's real nature stayed locked behind angles no one bothered to calculate. Only with the evolution of precision faceting did its secret surface. Cut along its dominant axis, the stone released a controlled interplay of hues, geometric flashes that revealed the lattice's internal order. Tilted differently, another palette appeared: cool forest, warm copper, fleeting rose. Light obeyed the mineral's instructions, traveling through pathways etched millions of years earlier. Jewelers who understood this code transformed the stone from a stubborn cutter's challenge into a gem of intellectual beauty. Andalusite's shifting palette lives as proof that order can reside within complexity, its geometry carrying a discipline visible only to those willing to watch color unfold along its deliberate axes. Where Andalusite revealed beauty through precision, the next gemstone carries a different truth. One shaped not by structure, but by time. Its value was hidden behind the rhythm of ancient waters, slow mineral breaths, and chambers sealed for centuries. If Andalusite spoke the language of alignment and calibrated angles, this stone speaks the language of memory, layered, patient, and stained with the colors of a world that moved long before markets cared to notice. Its mispricing endured not because it was misunderstood, but because its most remarkable forms remained hidden until the earth itself chose to open them. Ranked 11th. Rhodochrosite, too soft, too cheap, until Argentina. For centuries, this mineral was dismissed as too soft, too fragile, too easily marred for adornment. Traders treated it as an ornamental curiosity. Miners regarded it as a byproduct of silver veins, not a treasure of its own. Yet rhodochrosite held within its structure a legacy far older than the economies that undervalued it. Its story begins in the Andes, where hydrothermal fluids once circulated through narrow fractures, depositing manganese-rich solutions in rhythmic pulses. Over thousands of years, these pulses thickened into stalactites, mineral archives shaped drop by drop. Unlike many gemstones that crystallize in singular moments of heat or pressure, rhodochrosite formed through continuity, layers growing like tree rings, each marking a chapter in the long dialogue between mineral and mountain. This continuity became its hallmark, but also the source of its mispricing. The world favored hardness, clarity, and durability. Rhodochrosite offered memory, softness, and quiet beauty instead. When early miners in Argentina's Catamarca province discovered the great rhodochrosite chambers, hollow caverns lined with stalactites glowing like frozen sunsets, they broke them apart without ceremony. The mineral, delicate and easily cleaved, could not withstand the violence of extraction. Few specimens survived intact, and those that did traveled through markets as curios rather than gemstones. The legacy inside these formations remained unrecognized. The record of water chemistry, tectonic shifts, and volcanic intervals preserved in their concentric bands. The turning point arrived when geologists documented the Inca Rose caves, revealing structures so rare that they bordered on the improbable. Here, rhodochrosite had grown undisturbed for millennia, recording subtle changes in groundwater and temperature through shifts in color, pale pink during calm periods, deep red during mineral-rich surges. These formations were not just minerals, they were chronicles. Museums began to treat them as geological manuscripts, and collectors, once indifferent, recognized their irreplaceability. As preservation methods improved, whole stalactites were recovered with minimal damage. Cut into cross-sections, they displayed natural mandalas, rings radiating outward like the slow heartbeat of the mountain. Suddenly, the softness that once undermined the stone's market value became part of its identity. Fragility transformed into exclusivity. Each slice was a singular record, impossible to duplicate, dependent on conditions that no modern process could recreate. Rhodochrosite's ascent in value was not driven by fashion, nor by industrial demand, but by the acknowledgement of its long memory. The stone carried within it the legacy of vanished waters and ancient tectonic rhythms. Argentina, once the site of its neglect, became the guardian of its finest forms. And as awareness grew, so did respect. What had been overlooked as too delicate for jewelry became revered as a geological heirloom. In every band of rhodochrosite lies a record the mountains never meant to erase, a layered memory whose worth grows not from brilliance, but from the patience it took to form. The layered patience of rhodochrosite points backward through time, but the next gemstone moves in the opposite direction, outward into rarity shaped not by memory, but by scarcity. If rhodochrosite recorded the slow breath of mountains, this upcoming mineral emerged from environments that offered almost nothing. Narrow fractures, fleeting chemical balances, and geological margins where only a few crystals could ever form. Mispriced not because it was misunderstood, but because the world never imagined how little of it the earth allowed to exist. Ranked 10th. Axinite, the stone that looks like nothing else. Axinite entered the mineral world quietly, carried out of metamorphic ridges and fragments no larger than a thumbprint. Brownish lilac slivers, with edges so sharp they seemed shaped for cutting wind rather than reflecting light. At first glance, the stone gave little reason for desire. Its colors were subdued, its transparency inconsistent, its geometry unusual. Yet beneath that understated exterior lay a structure capable of bending light in ways few gemstones could match. And once collectors discovered this ability, this strange electrical liveliness, Axinite became an object of fixation. Its obsession did not bloom overnight. For decades, Axinite remained an academic curiosity, studied more for its triclinic symmetry than its potential as a gem. Museums displayed it as a mineralogical outlier, blades with serrated edges, grouped in starburst clusters, as though lightning had frozen mid-strike. Traditional jewelers ignored it. Merchants priced it modestly. But in the circles of gem cutters who sought the unusual rather than the obvious, Axinite began to whisper its allure. The spark came from a discovery in the Pyrenees, where crystals emerged elongate, razor-thin, and amber-clear, specimens that revealed an optical character unlike anything else. When rotated under a single beam, Axinite released flashes that seemed to travel across the crystal rather than erupt from within. Light did not scatter, it raced. These directional bursts, part pleochroism and part internal refraction, felt almost kinetic. Collectors describe them as moving fire, a sensation no other brown-toned gemstone could reproduce. Once this secret surfaced, desire followed swiftly. Small groups of connoisseurs began competing for even modest stones. Larger, transparent pieces inspired bidding wars that reached far beyond their former worth. Gem cutters, once hesitant, pursued Axinite with almost monastic discipline. Every facet required calculation, every angle risked collapse. Yet the potential reward, those streaks of amber, violet, and smoky cognac lighting up in a single turn, drew them deeper into the mineral's challenge. The obsession intensified as more localities appeared. Tanzanian crystals with honeyed clarity, Californian specimens tinted with hints of violet, French pieces displaying an interplay of bronze and wine red that bordered on hypnotic. Each region offered a slightly different palette, and each palette attracted its own following. Collectors began to classify Axinite not merely by locality, but by personality. No two crystals behaved alike, and this inconsistency, far from a flaw, became a source of fervor. Predictability belonged to mass-market gems. Axinite belonged to those who sought the unrepeatable. By this stage, the mineral's mispricing was no longer tied to ignorance, but to its refusal to cooperate with commercial expectations. Axinite could fracture unpredictably. Its hardness sat in a narrow zone between workable and treacherous. Large, clean specimens were rare, and because the stone formed only under tightly constrained metamorphic conditions, new deposits offered no guarantee of quality. These limitations fueled desire rather than diminishing it. Scarcity sharpened the chase. Axinite remained sought not for spectacle, but for singularity, a mineral whose very unpredictability transformed it into a pursuit reserved for those drawn to the unrepeatable. Ranked 9th, Grandidierite, unknown. Until 1902, mispriced until 2014. Grandidierite emerged not in abundance, nor in crystalline clusters that announced themselves to the world, but in pockets where pressure, heat, and elemental scarcity worked together with improbable harmony. Its birth was not the result of a single geological event, but of a long conversation among tectonic forces, the grinding of continental fragments, the draw of boron-rich fluids through fractured rock, the slow tempering of minerals in zones where the Earth's crust grew thin and vulnerable. From this delicate crucible, the blue-green crystals took shape, quietly, selectively, reluctantly. Early explorers who combed these coastlines in the early 1900s found little that hinted at such hidden elegance. The first Grandidierite specimens were opaque, seafoam-colored, and unassuming. Their teal shadows suggested something interesting, but never enough to command attention. Mineralogists noted their composition, cataloged their structure, and placed them in drawers marked with modest importance. Genesis rarely announces itself with grandeur. The world often overlooks minerals that require ideal conditions to reach their final form. Inside the Earth, however, the story was different. Grandidierite's lattice developed through a narrow mineralogical window. Too little boron, and the stone would never crystallize. Too much magnesium, and its color turned lifeless. Too rapid a cooling, and its clarity dimmed into chalk. This gemstone required balance at every stage. Mica-rich rocks had to fold and refold under metamorphic strain. Water had to move through them, carrying the exact chemistry needed, and the tectonic rhythm had to remain steady enough for crystals to grow without fracture. Few minerals demand such unanimity from the earth. Even fewer succeed. Because fine material formed only under these vanishingly rare circumstances, the early crystals that reached human hands represented only the earliest, least developed stages of their genesis. Opaque stones meant opaque value. For more than a century, Grandidierite existed primarily as a scientific curiosity, a mineral known for unusual chemistry, not for beauty. Its mispricing was not a failure of perception, but a reflection of incompleteness. The world had encountered only the prologue of its formation, not its culmination. That changed in 2014 when miners in southern Madagascar uncovered a narrow seam of unusually clear Grandidierite, crystals flushed with a vivid oceanic blue-green, as if the mineral had finally reached the full expression of its birth. These pieces were transparent enough to cut, vibrant enough to rival Paraiba tourmaline, and rare enough that a single clean carat could shift market predictions. For the first time, collectors could see the mineral not as a geological note, but as an extraordinary gem shaped by impossible conditions. As faceted examples entered the gem world, their true origin, slow, selective, exacting, became a point of fascination. Value surged not because the stone changed, but because humanity finally glimpsed the full arc of its genesis. What had been mispriced for a century revealed itself as one of the Earth's most demanding creations. Its beauty owed to a formation so constrained that only a handful of places on the planet could nurture it. Grandidierite continues to bear the quiet weight of its origin, shaped by conditions so selective that each crystal feels less discovered than permitted. Ranked 8th, Jeremejevite, a gem the Old World overlooked. The first explorers who sought Jeremejevite in the late 19th century found themselves navigating basaltic towers that fractured unpredictably. Each strike of the hammer risked collapsing delicate pegmatite pockets. Crystals existed only in pockets no larger than cupped hands, protected by walls that split easily under vibration. To reach them, miners had to work slowly, slower than the industry allowed, slower than profit encouraged. In regions where extraction rewarded speed, Jeremejevite demanded restraint. Those who rushed lost everything. Those who waited uncovered a gem that shimmered with the faintest shades of sky, ice blue, pale citron, and the ghostly transparency of desert air. These early sacrifices extended beyond physical danger. Single intact crystals could take weeks to recover, and each decision of where to cut, where to chisel, carried a permanent consequence. A wrong angle fractured not only the stone, but the chance of financial survival for the season. Many abandoned the search, choosing safer minerals with predictable yields. Jeremejevite remained overlooked, not because it lacked allure, but because few were willing to pay the cost of extracting it with the gentleness it required. Meanwhile, the outside world viewed the gem through scraps and broken pieces. Without complete specimens, traders classified it with minor silicates, valuable academically, but not commercially. The Old World never had the opportunity to witness the full elegance of a crystal unbroken. Its sharp prism faces, its delicate pleochroism, its improbable clarity. Mispricing became the natural outcome of scarcity, and scarcity the result of the risks no one wished to shoulder. Everything shifted when the Arango pockets yielded a handful of pristine crystals in the early 2000s. These specimens, recovered through slow, meticulous handwork, displayed a beauty the markets had never imagined. When rotated under controlled light, Jeremejevite revealed a subtle transition from near-colorless purity to soft, pale blue, an effect so restrained that it seemed more like a whisper than a gemstone phenomenon. The world began to understand what had been sacrificed for a century, the opportunity to see the mineral in its complete form. Even then, the stone remained difficult. Large crystals shattered during cutting. Smaller ones crumbled under the heat of polishing wheels. Lapidaries had to choose between maximizing yield and preserving integrity, another form of sacrifice that shaped its value. Each faceted Jeremejevite represented hours of risk, patience, and the acceptance that even success would come in millimeters, not carats. Every intact Jeremejevite carries within it the trace of what was risked to free it, a fragile clarity shaped as much by human restraint as by geological time. The fragile clarity of Jeremejevite marked a chapter shaped by risk. Crystals recovered only through patience, steadiness, and the willingness to lose more than was gained. But the next gemstone speaks not of sacrifice, but of consequence. Far from the desert ridges where Jeremejevite formed, another mineral waited in the folds of a single Californian range, its brilliance confined to a landscape that offered no second source. Here, rarity was not the outcome of danger, but of geography itself, a treasure whose entire history would hinge on one place, one seam, and one fleeting moment in geological time. Ranked 7th, Benitoite, California's lost treasure. Benitoite was beautiful, yes, but overshadowed at birth by a misunderstanding of its identity. For decades, it was traded as a curiosity, its value anchored to a market that had not yet comprehended what scarcity meant in geological terms. What followed was a century-long lesson, that the consequences of ignoring a stone's rarity can reshape its entire legacy. At its origin, Benitoite formed under a sequence of mineralogical conditions so limited that they seem almost accidental. Boron-rich fluids intruded into serpentine environments, cooling in narrow fissures where pressure, chemistry, and temperature aligned for only brief geological intervals. The result was a gem of extraordinary dispersion, blue by daylight, violet by night, luminous under ultraviolet light. Yet the Earth allowed this process to occur in only one significant location. The world would not understand this for decades. Extraction began modestly, driven by miners searching for industrial minerals. Benitoite appeared in their haul as attractive but minor finds. Small crystals easily overlooked, larger ones rare enough to seem incidental. The consequence of this indifference was immediate. Countless pockets were shattered before any awareness of their significance could form. Specimens that today would command museum-level reverence were discarded, broken, or lost. A gemstone that existed in a single corner of the planet was treated as though another vein might surface somewhere else. It did not. As the Blue Moon mine matured, researchers realized the full extent of the mineral's isolation. Nowhere else did Earth repeat the precise mineral choreography required to produce benitoite in gem quality. The stone's mispricing became a case study in what happens when rarity is invisible, how absence can be mistaken for abundance until the supply line collapses. By the time the world understood, the richest pockets had already surrendered their contents. With growing recognition came another consequence: protection. California designated benitoite as its official state gemstone. Access to the original mine tightened. Commercial extraction ceased. What remained in the ground stayed in the ground. The shift from overlooked mineral to safeguarded treasure marked a dramatic reversal in fortune. Where once the stone's value lay dormant, now its scarcity defined it. Collectors who had once purchased benitoite casually discovered that their small specimens had transformed into cultural artifacts. Museums sought pieces not merely for their color, but for their geological singularity. And as ultraviolet exhibits revealed the gem's electric glow, public fascination deepened. The consequence of early neglect had crystallized into reverence. Benitoite's story endures as a lesson in finite origins. Once the seams are gone, only the memory of their light remains to measure its value. The story of benitoite closed upon a landscape defined by finality. One seam, one origin, one brilliance that geology allowed only once. Yet after the silence of a vanished source, the narrative turns toward a gemstone shaped not by disappearance, but by misunderstanding. In the colder latitudes of Siberia, deep beneath forests locked in permafrost, another mineral waited behind a veil of assumption, a green so vivid it was mistaken for imitation, dismissed as a reflection of something better known. Where benitoite revealed what is lost when rarity is overlooked, this next stone reveals what happens when science looks again and corrects a belief held for far too long. Ranked 6th, chrome diopside. Poor man's emerald until science corrected it. For decades, chrome diopside lived under a name that obscured its truth. In market stalls and modest gem shops, It was labeled the poor man's emerald, a phrase that carried both dismissal and misunderstanding. The world saw a green so vivid that it must have been an imitation of something nobler, something rarer, something culturally sanctioned. The label endured, and the gemstone story collapsed beneath it. Yet buried inside its crystalline core was a reality far more complex than the words used to diminish it. Its green did not come from imitation, but from one of the most forceful chromophores in mineralogy, chromium in its purest structural incorporation. This chromium, occupying sites deep within the diopside lattice, produced a saturation so immediate and unfiltered that early traders suspected enhancement. But this richness was not applied, it was inherited, formed under pressures where iron-poor, magnesium-rich silicates met precisely the right trace elements carried by metamorphic fluids. The earth had chosen its ingredients carefully, assembling them in a chamber where even slight chemical drift would have dulled the color into olive or brown. The green that resulted was not a substitute for emerald. It was a revelation of diopside's own identity. The misunderstanding widened due to locality. The most vivid material came from remote Siberian deposits, extracted during short summers when the permafrost softened just enough for miners to break the ground. The difficulty of extraction, combined with the short operational window, should have suggested a rarity that markets overlooked. Instead, scarcity disguised itself as affordability. Without widespread recognition, the stone circulated quietly, its value anchored to an assumption rather than a truth. Science began to intervene only when spectroscopic analysis illuminated the stone's precise optical behavior. Light did not simply enter chrome diopside, it collided with chromium in a way that amplified green wavelengths with remarkable force. This amplification created a hue more direct than emerald, more transparent than chrome tourmaline, and more natural than any diffusion-enhanced gemstone. Under magnification, twin patterns revealed a crystalline order that seemed almost too tidy for a mineral formed under such harsh conditions. The stone was not a copy, it was a convergence of rare geological circumstances. With this revelation came a second. Chrome diopside's formation depended on a narrow metamorphic corridor. Mines that produced gem-quality material did so sporadically, as though each crystal were an accident of chemistry refined over millennia. This fragility extended into its future. Experts recognize that the Siberian deposits, responsible for nearly all of the world's finest material, had no clear replacements elsewhere. Where emerald appeared in belts across continents, chrome diopside emerged in isolated moments of mineralogical alignment. Gradually, the marketplace recalibrated. Jewelers who once dismissed the stone began to understand its purity of color. Museum curators reclassified it not as an emerald surrogate, but as a distinct chromium silicate worthy of its own narrative. Collectors noticed that its transparency allowed light to move through it with a clarity emerald rarely matched. What had been called poor now revealed itself as geologically exquisite. Chrome diopside stands as a reminder that color, when born of perfect chemistry, needs no comparison to claim its place in the mineral world. Ranked fifth, black opal. Once valueless, now Australia's crown jewel. Long before black opal became the emblem of Australia's mineral identity, it lived in a landscape defined by contradiction. Parched ridges, abandoned diggings, and towns held together more by rumor than by prosperity. Here, under the cracked soils of Lightning Ridge, opal miners searched not for beauty, but for survival. White opal commanded modest value, fire opal a little more. Black opal, however, was dismissed as dense, muddy, unsellable. Traders insisted the dark body tone obscured the play of color. Buyers turned away from it. Even miners, driven by necessity rather than pride, treated black opal as a burden. Too strange to categorize, too unpredictable to price. This neglect created a tension that shaped the stone's destiny. Beneath the surface, black opal concealed a phenomenon unmatched by any other gem. Color trapped in darkness, fire suspended in void, spectral flashes erupting from carbon-rich silicate gel that hardened millions of years earlier. Yet the darker the body tone, the more fiercely markets resisted. Jewelers found the material unsettling. Merchants feared it would never appeal to buyers accustomed to pale stones. And so the most extraordinary opal the Earth had ever produced remained in the shadows, misunderstood because its beauty crossed the boundaries of expectation. The conflict intensified as miners struggled between discarding black opal and storing it in hope. Some kept fragments in boxes under camp beds, believing the stones too strange to throw away, yet not valuable enough to sell. Others used them as stakes in makeshift card games. The tension between scarcity and worth, between geological wonder and economic dismissal, tightened with each passing season. And then the turning point arrived. Under a jeweler's loupe in Sydney, a single stone from Lightning Ridge revealed its secret, a flame pattern that ignited across the dark surface like a storm of color. Violet folding into green, red blooming against blue, spectral ribbons moving with the slightest angle of rotation. The darkness did not hide the color, it intensified it. This inversion shattered the long-held belief that opal needed brightness to shine. The world had misunderstood. Black opal was not inferior. It was the pinnacle of the phenomenon. With this revelation, tension shifted from neglect to desire. Collectors who once ignored black opal now competed for even the smallest slices. Designers realized that the dark base tone allowed color to stand free from dilution, creating effects impossible in lighter opal. Museums recognized its geological singularity. Microspheres of silica, arranged in near-perfect order, producing diffraction that only blackness could amplify. But the reconciliation came too late to prevent another tension: scarcity. By the time the world understood black opal's value, many productive fields had been exhausted. Lightning Ridge remained the sole source of stones displaying full-spectrum fire in a dark body tone. Other localities produced hints, suggestions, possibilities, but not the phenomenon in its complete form. Demand rose, supply did not. Black opal's darkened body now holds the tension it once suffered, a gemstone whose depth reveals that light can shine fiercest when it rises from shadow. Ranked fourth, Painite, once the rarest stone on Earth. Painite entered human knowledge the way anomalies often do, quietly, inconveniently, and with a reluctance that made its existence feel almost accidental. When the first crystal was identified in Myanmar in the 1950s, mineralogists believed they were cataloging a slightly unusual variety of tourmaline or garnet. Only when crystallographic measurements deviated from every known pattern did its identity begin to fracture expectations. The angles were wrong. The refractive indices defied prediction. Even the color, deep brick red laced with flashes of brown, seemed caught between categories. Painite refused to belong anywhere, and for decades that refusal made it nearly invisible. The anomaly deepened with time. Between the mid-20th century and the early 2000s, only 2 complete crystals were confirmed. Museums held them like scientific curios rather than gemstones, and the outside world scarcely noticed. Rarity was not the correct word. Rarity implies scarcity within a known framework. Painite had no framework. It existed in quantities so small that geologists questioned whether the mineral was a stable phase at all, or merely a transitional accident, a fleeting structure caught between more common barates. Its chemistry provided no comfort. Zirconium, boron, calcium, oxygen, an improbable alliance requiring conditions that seldom intersect. Within the Earth, these ingredients rarely occupy the same neighborhood, and rarer still do they align in a structural motif stable enough to persist through metamorphic change. Painite's lattice combined elements that nature tends to keep apart. The chance of them assembling correctly was so minuscule that some researchers treated the mineral as a statistical outlier, an error of geology rather than a product of it. This anomaly shaped its mispricing. Jewelers could not value what they could not obtain. Collectors could not covet what they could not see. With no supply chain, no market precedent, and almost no specimens, Painite became a mineral whose existence felt theoretical. In the absence of context, it was priced as a curiosity, not a treasure. Even when reports emerged of a few additional fragments, skepticism outweighed enthusiasm. Many assumed the pieces were mislabeled sphenels or garnets, stones the world already understood. Then came the shift beneath the mountain soils of Mogok. Small pockets of pegmatite revealed crystals, still rare still stubbornly small, but unquestionably painite. The anomaly had not vanished. It had simply been hidden in geological crevices, long overlooked. As specimens reached laboratories, their physical properties confirmed the earlier mystery. Birefringence inconsistent with expectation, pleochroism that shifted from red to smoky brown, and trace element signatures unlike any established gem. With each piece examined, the anomaly grew less about scarcity and more about identity. Painite had not been mispriced because it was undervalued. It had been mispriced because it contradicted the rules that markets rely upon. Rules of supply, predictability, reproducibility. No two crystals behaved the same under polarized light. No locality provided stable output. No geological model fully explained its formation. Painite existed, but only barely. Its presence in the world felt like an exception, the earth allowed only for reasons known to itself. Painite persists as an exception written into the crust. Rare not through demand, but through the improbable circumstances that allow it to exist at all. Ranked third, Taaffeite, a gem discovered after it was cut. Taaffeite entered the mineral record not through the Earth's deliberate unveiling, but through a moment of interruption, an anomaly in a jeweler's parcel of spinels. The stone had already been cut, already been shaped, already been sorted into a category the world believed it understood. But under magnification, its light fractured differently. Pleochroic shadows shifted from lilac to mauve in ways spinel could not reproduce. Angles disobeyed. The gem resisted its assigned identity, and from that small resistance began an obsession that would capture mineralogists, cutters, and collectors for decades. Its discovery marked the start of a pursuit defined not by abundance, but by absence. No mine produced Taaffeite intentionally. No vein revealed its boundaries. No map charted its distribution. The mineral lived in the shadows of other species, embedded within spinel-rich gravels, hidden inside weathered sediments, indistinguishable until the moment light exposed its secret. The world had overlooked Taaffeite for centuries, not because it was plain, but because it imitated nothing outwardly unusual. Only those who studied it intensely sensed its difference. This subtlety became the catalyst for obsession. Researchers undertook the task of distinguishing Taaffeite from spinel through microscopic criteria: birefringence, refractive indices, crystalline symmetry. Each discovery sharpened the chase. If spinel could hide Taaffeite so completely, how many such gems had passed unnoticed through markets, through hands, through history? Laboratories began re-examining old collections, hunting for discrepancies that hinted at the gem's presence. Museums performed quiet audits. Private collectors submitted stones for reclassification. A global search emerged from a single, stubborn glimmer. In Sri Lanka and southern Tanzania, alluvial miners sifted through gravels long considered exhausted, now driven by the possibility that something extraordinarily rare had been hiding in their midst. The work was delicate, the yields vanishingly small. For every basket of material washed and sorted, perhaps a single grain might bear the faint hallmarks needed for further inspection. Even then, confirmation was never immediate. Taaffeite required multiple proofs, optical, chemical, structural, before it relinquished its identity. The gem's mispricing endured because the world could not fix a value to a mineral it could barely confirm. Its rarity defied commercial logic. No predictable supply meant no predictable market. Jewelers hesitated. Collectors paused. But the hesitation intensified the pursuit, drawing attention to the very quality that made Taaffeite extraordinary. It existed in fragments of fragments, a mineral that revealed itself only when human scrutiny approached the edge of obsession. As more specimens surfaced, still few, still fiercely contested, the gemstone's visual signature became unmistakable. Unlike spinel's bold clarity, Taaffeite carried a gentler light, a lavender-pink tone that seemed to collect quietly at the center of each facet. Pleochroism breathed through it like a pulse, shifting shade by shade in response to even slight rotations. Under the microscope, its crystalline symmetry diverged from spinel by a margin so precise that only trained eyes could trace it. The beauty was not dramatic, it was exact. Over time, this precision transformed Taaffeite from an overlooked mineral into a coveted rarity, not because it overwhelmed the senses, but because it demanded attention. Scholarly, meticulous, relentless. Its existence was a challenge, its discovery a triumph of persistence over chance. Each confirmed specimen validated years of searching. Each gem carried the weight of countless stones examined and dismissed. Each Taaffeite crystal echoes the long search that uncovered it. A gem defined not by abundance, but by the persistence required to recognize its difference. Ranked second, purple-pink Jadeite, a color China once ignored. For more than 1,000 years, Jadeite carried a hierarchy carved not by the earth, but by culture. In Imperial China, the language of jade was built on green, imperial green, kingfisher green, moss green. These tones shaped rituals, adorned scholars' desks, and defined the aesthetics of dynasties. Anything outside this spectrum drifted into obscurity. Lavender and rose-toned jadeite, despite their quiet beauty, remained peripheral, dismissed as diluted expressions of the true stone. Markets followed tradition, value aligned with expectation, and purple-pink jadeite remained a treasure with no throne. But the earth had never shared the human preference. In mineralogical terms, the hues of purple and pink were neither accidents nor impurities. They were the consequence of trace manganese infiltrating jadeite's structure under specific metamorphic conditions. These shades represented geological nuance, not deviation, yet nuance rarely shaped value, until the 20th century fractured those older hierarchies. The turning point did not arise from a single discovery, but from a shifting eye. As global gemology expanded, scholars began to reinterpret jadeite not as a monolithic symbol, but as a spectrum. Under laboratory lights, purple-pink jadeite revealed microstructures with remarkable translucency, fibered networks that captured light with a softness reminiscent of clouded quartz, yet more disciplined in its internal arrangement. What had once been considered secondary emerged as a chromatic identity of its own. This shift triggered consequences that spread far beyond gem cabinets. Collectors who once sought only green began to reassess the cultural weight that tradition had imposed. Auction houses introduced lavender pieces with caution, uncertain how markets would respond. Yet each sale marked a subtle rearrangement of value. Demand rose, prices corrected, a new vocabulary of desire formed, soft, poetic, and centered on the tones once left untouched. For artisans, the change reshaped centuries of practice. Carvers who had long reserved their finest tools for emerald green boulders began choosing lavender material for sculptures, requiring delicacy rather than majesty. The gentle translucency of purple-pink jadeite lent itself to motifs of mist, moonlight, and spring blossoms, imagery rarely attempted during earlier periods. In workshops from Hong Kong to Yangon, a quiet revolution unfolded. The understanding that jadeite's beauty did not depend on conformity, but on expression. The most profound consequences, however, unfolded within the stone's homeland. As younger generations of collectors sought individuality rather than tradition, purple-pink jadeite became a symbol of reinterpretation, an acceptance that value evolves, that beauty shifts, that heritage can expand without erasing its past. Museums began to display lavender jadeite alongside imperial green, not as supporting material, but as a parallel lineage, equally grounded in geology and artistry. Mispricing faded as scarcity surfaced. The deposits capable of producing fine lavender jadeite proved few, and the regions yielding consistently saturated pink-purple material even fewer. Once markets acknowledged this, the stones that had languished in drawers or been carved into modest trinkets rapidly transformed into coveted masterpieces. The color once ignored became a rarity the world now struggled to obtain. Purple-pink jadeite now carries a quieter authority, its value shaped by a culture learning that beauty expands when perception is allowed to shift. In first place, Sphene, the most mispriced gemstone in history. In the long history of gemstones, few have lived so profoundly in silence as Sphene. It was present everywhere, tucked inside metamorphic folds, lining the interiors of granitic veins, appearing as small, inconspicuous shards in the hands of field geologists. Yet almost nowhere did it command attention. The world walked past it, cataloged it, crushed it underfoot during mineral surveys, and placed it into specimen trays with the same indifference reserved for common accessory minerals. Sphene endured centuries not of doubt or conflict, but of absence. Absence of recognition, absence of desire, absence of a name spoken with awe. Yet within its quiet form lay a phenomenon waiting for a witness. When light entered Sphene, it did not merely refract, it separated into spectral fire with an intensity few gemstones could rival. Dispersion higher than diamond, flashes that moved like fractured rainbows, colors splitting faster than the eye could trace. Yet all of this remained unseen, concealed behind crystals too small, too flawed, or too neglected to reveal their nature. Beauty lived inside it, but no one stayed long enough to notice. The silence began with sighs. Sphene rarely formed in large crystals. Most pieces broke during metamorphic shifts or cooled in shapes too thin for cutting. Merchants preferred stones that offered predictability. Sphene offered only glimpses. Jewelers sought hardness. Sphene cleaved under pressure. Collectors chased color saturation. Sphene arrived in muted olives, browns, and ambers that did not yet hint at the inferno contained within. Its finest greens, those electric citrus tones capable of igniting its spectral fire, remained buried in pockets no wider than a handspan, deep in terrains few miners ever disturbed. Markets filled the silence with misinterpretation. Sphene was labeled a collector's mineral, an inclusion curiosity, a stone interesting only to academic drawers and alpine field kits. Its optical properties were known in theory, yet uncelebrated in practice. Without large gems to display, without famous mines to romanticize, without historical patrons to elevate it, Sphene had no stage on which to speak. The gemstone world continued spinning around it, unaware of the brilliance it had long ignored. The turning point did not come from discovery, but from attention. A handful of cutters, working with the rare, clean crystals from Madagascar and Pakistan, shaped Sphene in silence, delicate hands coaxing fire from fragility. Under the faceting wheel, the stone finally unfolded. Light accelerated, colors fractured, dispersion erupted in bands of red, green, and gold. What centuries of absence had hidden emerged in a single rotation under the lamp. The earth had not been withholding, humanity had simply failed to look. Recognition arrived slowly, almost reluctantly. Museums introduced Sphene, not as a footnote, but as spectacle. Collectors encountering its fire for the first time questioned how such brilliance could have gone unnoticed for so long. The answer was embedded in the stone's history. Sphene had always been present, but presence alone is not enough. Value grows not from existence, but from the moment silence is finally broken. Sphene lingers at the edge of attention, its brilliance emerging only in the still moments. Those rare instants when silence becomes the only light it needs. Across these 15 gemstones runs a single thread. Geological truth often moves more slowly than human understanding. Stones dismissed as common revealed structures found almost nowhere else. Others, overlooked for centuries, carried colors shaped by conditions the earth may never repeat. A few existed in fragments so small that their stories remained silent until science finally learned to listen. What their histories share is not rarity nor brilliance, but the quiet reminder that value shifts the moment perception changes. When light enters at the right angle, when knowledge grows, when a fragment is examined instead of ignored, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, and a forgotten crystal becomes a record of forces older than memory. As this journey closes, one question remains for those who collect, study, or simply find beauty in the hidden work of geology. Which of these 15 gemstones changed the way you think about value, and why? Your answer shapes not the stones themselves, but the way their stories continue in the hands of those who finally see them.